We have an active shooter.
Let's go ahead and declare this a mass casualty.
Welcome to Active Shooter, a podcast that covers the whys, the hows, and the aftermath of active shooter and mass casualty events.
They have an active shooter in the building. A second call says they are being attacked.
I've been shot. 16910 means we got shots fired at 4:15 at Route 291. Sounded like an automatic firearm.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter
mass casualty incidents.
Thank you for listening.
You are listening to Active Shooter, a podcast that may contain adult themes, explicit language, and graphic depictions of violence. Portions of this show may be traumatic for those under 18. Listener discretion is advised.
Good evening to our viewers in the West. We are going to begin with breaking news. Another mass shooting. A gunman went on a rampage in Milwaukee this afternoon. Multiple people are dead, including the shooter. It happened at the Molson Coors complex where Miller beer is brewed. As the gunfire rang out, workers were told to shelter in place as police swarmed the scene.
The shooting at the Molson Coors Beverage Company Milwaukee complex isn't one that can be easily categorized as workplace violence, racially motivated, anti-Semitic, a mental health break, or school bullying. This shooter displayed clear signs of deteriorating mental health, increasing paranoia, and gnawing anger towards the numerous racial injustices that he encountered. Each victim was precisely selected, yet there were no obvious interpersonal conflicts between the shooter and each specific victim. It makes shootings such as these so unpredictable, despite the mounting warning signs. Today's case is dedicated to the lives and memories of the 5 shooting victims: Jenide Jean Levschetz, Dana Walk, Jesus Jesse Valle Jr., Dale Hudson, and Trevor Wetzelar.
Active Shooter the podcast is a High Five Holly production, and I'm your host, JT. If you've listened to our prior episodes, you know that the Active Shooter podcast team has taken the no notoriety pledge, and we will not be sharing the real name of the shooters that we cover. We will be giving the shooters a pseudonym and refer to them by that name throughout the episode. This will help in clearing up any confusion in the story, while remaining true to our pledge and not naming the shooter by their actual name.
We will refer to today's shooter as Stan. The Molson Coors Beverage Company, located at 4100 West State Street on the northwest side of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, is a sprawling complex housing more than 20 buildings that employed over 1,000 people. The area is often referred to as Miller Valley, the name that harkens back to the days of the Miller Brewing Company, which is now part of the Molson Coors Company. Among the many buildings is a 160-year-old brewery, the corporate offices, including customer service, engineering, finance, and human resources, a distribution center the size of 5 football fields, and a packing center that churns out thousands of bottles and cans every minute. Tours are offered to the public, showcasing the underground caves used to store beer, a champagne room, an outdoor beer garden that can accommodate 300 people, a Stein Hall with stained glass windows, and the saloon, which was filled with intricate woodworking. Wednesday, February 26, 2020, was a cold Milwaukee, Wisconsin day. A light snow fell throughout the day, as employees for the Molson Coors plant were busy as always. There was a maintenance planning meeting being held that morning, although it was relatively short, only lasting about 15 minutes according to a witness. That same witness later confirmed that there were no arguments or issues of any kind at the meeting, which only a handful of employees attended, including 4 of the shooting victims and the shooter. Later that afternoon, Stan, along with a few other employees, were sitting in the break room enjoying some donuts and milk. Stan was talking about vacations and didn't outwardly appear to be disturbed or upset. A witness later reported that Stan seemed to be receiving text messages. It seems that while he was engaged in conversation, he appeared distracted at the same time. As the group sat, talking, Gene Levschetz entered the room. Stan immediately took notice, calling out to him, quote, "Oh, Gene, sit down and have a fellowship with us." Without hesitation, Gene sat, chatting with Stan and the others for a few minutes. Trevor Wetzelaar walked in shortly after Gene, and Stan looked up and acknowledged him. Trevor continued into the control room where he relieved another employee, Jesse, as the control room operator. At the same time, Gene stood up and left the break room and entered the bathroom where he promptly locked the door and completed his business. As Gene locked the restroom door, Stan shook his head in a manner that displayed annoyance towards Gene. After leaving the bathroom, Gene returned to the control room, passing back through the break room. Once he was out of earshot, Stan said out loud, quote,
"What the fuck is his problem?"
Others in the room were slightly bewildered. They weren't sure who Stan was referring to, but they were inclined to think he was talking about Jesse since there was noticeable hostility, although it certainly appeared one-sided as most coworkers weren't aware of Jesse having an issue with Stan. At a little after 2 p.m., Stan rose and put on a pair of gloves as he exited the room, saying that he'd be right back. Another witness heard Stan making a phone call, where he said, quote,
"I just wanted to leave you a message that we'll go to after-school care today, and someone will pick her up. Okay, thank you, bye."
The witness recalled this statement as being noteworthy because Stan always made it a point to leave work promptly, so he could pick up his child from school on time. About 4 minutes passed before Stan was heard saying, quote,
"I'll be back,"
before entering the control room. He carried a .40 caliber Walther P99C semi-automatic pistol and a .45 caliber Springfield XDM semi-automatic pistol that was equipped with dead air armament Ghost suppressor. Minutes later, witnesses heard 4 gunshot blasts, one right after the other. Among the first shot was 61-year-old Gennady Gene Levschetz, a benevolent man who was blessed to be the husband of Alina, father to Tanya and Becca, and grandfather to Hannah and Benny. Gene, his wife, and their then 6-year-old daughter left the Soviet Union, specifically Belarus, in the summer of 1989, searching for the American dream. He earned a degree in civil engineering before eventually going to work for the Molson Coors company as a boiler operator. Both of Gene's children attended the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and during their time there, he visited often, and his entire family said he loved spending time with them, valuing that time above all else. He frequently contacted relatives in Mexico, and it was very important to Gene to keep his family bond strong. His daughters said their dad was the best at making them feel intelligent, beautiful, and loved. It was just his way, and the compassionate man will be sorely missed. Outside of the control room area, an employee who was returning from lunch was on the 5th floor of Building 4 when he heard what he initially thought was a piece of equipment malfunctioning. It only took a beat before he realized what was truly happening. Back inside of the control room, 57-year-old Dana Walk was also shot and killed. Born on July 6, 1962, Dana graduated from Kettle Moraine High School in 1981. Before going on to marry his wife of 35 years, Dory. The high school sweethearts were parents to Andy, Melanie, and Michelle. Dana was a fisherman in his free time, and it was a sport he was passionate about. In fact, he was a member of the Pewaukee chapter of Walleyes for Pewaukee Lake, and even went ice boating during the winter months, cruising on a boat he built with his own hands. Dana was always busy, working on a project or a hobby, and was usually listening to music as he did so. The avid Green Bay Packers fan was a great man who will be mourned by many. Employees were racing throughout the plant, rushing into lockdown mode, as they were trained to do by way of numerous active shooter drills. People were screaming active shooter, and some employees were able to lock themselves inside of a coat room, taking shelter in a dark, cramped space that was a haven. Unfortunately for 50-year-old Dale Hudson, he wasn't able to make it to safety. The Elkhorn, Wisconsin native was married to his loving wife Kathleen, and they shared twin daughters, Annie and Sam. Dale also had a son from a previous marriage. An employee with the Molson Coors Company since 2008, he was approaching and looking very much forward to retirement. He was known as a quiet yet happy man who was always willing to pitch in and help out when he could. Dale was a nature lover who was outdoors whenever possible, and always with a hat of some sort atop his head. He golfed, hunted, and fished, and was said to have the skill to fix anything. Dale was a gifted handyman with an inherent ability to problem solve. This selfless man had a massive heart, and all who knew him will feel the loss. A witness just outside of the control room stated that he peered through a window into the room and saw Stan, who was standing over the body of their coworker, Jesse. 33-year-old Jesus Jesse Valley Jr. was happily married to the love of his life, Angelica. Together, they had 2 small children, a 3-year-old son and a 2-year-old daughter. Jesse was extremely close with his entire family, but especially his sister, Jenny, and he was the happiest when he was with the extended family, barbecuing and celebrating life. A devout Catholic, Jesse was proud of his heritage and was known to all as an incredibly generous soul. He loved to share new beers with his neighbors and could always be found outdoors spending time with his kids. Fittingly, a 7-piece mariachi band played at the funeral for a man who was beloved by so many. As Stan looked up from Jesse, a black firearm clutched in his hand, he turned and looked directly at the witness, and Trevor Levschetz, who was standing together, frozen in fear. Stan raised both hands and started waving at the pair. Without another second's hesitation, Trevor ran. The witness ran too. They shouted as they ran, alerting others of the shooting as they came to one of the delivery semi-trucks. The witness hopped into the cab of the truck, using the driver's cell phone to call 911. Stan shot and killed Trevor before turning the gun on himself. 33-year-old Trevor Wetzlar graduated high school in 2005 before attending the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is where he met his wife, Jane. Trevor graduated in 2009 with a political science degree, and in 2012 he enlisted in the Navy, which he served with for 6 years. Trevor's greatest professional accomplishment was his service as a nuclear reactor operator aboard the submarine USS Maryland. When he left the military in 2018, Trevor accepted a position with the Molson Coors Company, which allowed him to return home, where many of his family and friends lived in Milwaukee. Trevor and his wife were regular game night hosts, and the gregarious, fun-loving young man will be greatly missed. The company issued an employee-wide text message alert ordering all employees to lock down. They also posted on Twitter notifying the public of an active shooter in the area. As first responders arrived, they instructed employees to head immediately into a locker room and lock the door behind them. They would bring them out when it was clear and safe. It didn't take long for police to locate the deceased bodies of Trevor, Jesse, Dale, Dana, and Jean. Scattered throughout the massive building were hats, phones, and glasses. Workers were escorted from the building and patted down by officers, a humiliating and devastating, yet necessary task to ensure the continued safety of all involved. The scene looked like a war zone. Blood all over the place, in the hallway, on the ceiling, the overhead bay door, control room, and garbage cans. It was everywhere. The first 911 call reporting shots fired at the Molson Coors Beverage Company came in at 2:08 p.m.
Milwaukee County 911, this is Ashley. What is the location of your emergency?
My husband just called me from Miller Coors in Milwaukee and said that there's an active shooter on campus. Okay. I just want to make sure it was reported.
20 minutes later, police discovered the body of the shooter slumped against the wall, a single gunshot wound to his head, and a black handgun resting on his chest. A hospital located a few miles away from the brewery received word of the shooting nearby, so staff jumped into action. However, there never ended up being any transports due to the fact that there weren't any injuries, only deaths. 51-year-old Stan was married with 2 adult children, and 1 younger one. He had a brother living in North Texas, though it's unclear whether there were any other family connections. He served in the United States Coast Guard from 1987 to 1991, and was honorably discharged. Several neighbors described Stan as quiet, but polite. He took the time to check in with others, and he was just as frequently seen throwing the ball for his dog.
No, he is an excellent father. It's just a shame his family will be without him. He was a good husband. He worked hard. He did what he could with college. And the kids needed anything, he made sure they got it. That's how hard he worked.
When you looked out your front window,
It was a massive police car. You couldn't park nowhere. I would say to his family, let's all pray. Not just for the ones he shot. Let's pray for everybody.
Others report that Stan would sit on his porch with a handgun or shotgun nearby. He was known to order gun parts through the mail, and then he would assemble the firearms himself. One neighbor in particular indicated that Stan always carried a semi-automatic firearm, which was concealed in a backpack, and a smaller gun that fit in his pocket. While others seemed to make note of the weapons Stan was never without, it doesn't appear that anyone complained of him handling the guns in a manner that was aggressive or threatening towards others. For his part, Stan just referred to himself as a gun collector. Stan was employed as an electrician in the utilities department with Molson Coors for over 20 years, 17 of which were spent at the Milwaukee brewery. However, the time with the brewery hadn't always been a positive experience. Stan accused the company of discrimination, and even accused coworkers of coming into his home, moving furniture around, and bugging the house. He filed a grievance with the Human Resources Department, citing horrific incidents of racism, including being called incredibly derogatory names, and had terrible gestures made towards his person. The HR department ended up closing the complaint after determining the claims could not be proven. A friend of Stan's later said that there was an incident at work about 5 years before the shooting, where a hangman's noose was placed in his locker at work. The same friend said that numerous minority employees began to gather to take their serious concerns to human resources, but nothing ever came of it. A spokesperson for Molson Coors later said, quote, "We investigated it fully at the time, how it got there, who put it there, which was inconclusive due to camera angles. The company claims that they have looked into every complaint of racism, wrongdoers have been fired, and that they've taken measures to promote inclusion and diversity among employees." In 2015, Stan slipped off a ladder at work, tearing his rotator cuff. He refused to get the necessary surgery to repair the damage, mostly in part to not being able to afford to miss work, and it's not clear why it wasn't considered a work-related incident, allowing for workers' compensation. At about the same time, others close to Stan say he started to develop paranoid feelings, that the company had internal spies who were watching him. He filed another complaint with HR alleging that someone broke into his locker on several occasions to use his tablet, which he determined was happening after seeing his tablet's battery was lower than expected. Stan asked for the lock on his office to be changed, but the request was refused. At home, Stan kept several guns locked in 2 different safes that were located in the basement. In the winter of 2018, he placed surveillance cameras all around his house, including the hallway, living room, kitchen, and basement. At the time, he claimed to his wife that the cameras were there because someone broke into their home. Stan even told one neighbor that someone broke into his house, drugged him, and used his fingerprints as he lay unconscious to access his computer, and possibly even his cell phone. Stan's wife later told police that it never happened, and there was absolutely no evidence of such. She didn't love the cameras being everywhere, but she loved her husband, so she figured it was better to appease him. In 2019, Stan installed yet more cameras in the house, and about a year before the shooting, he started working out, which isn't odd in and of itself. It was the excessive or obsessive nature in which he threw himself into exercise. He lost so much weight that a friend described Stan as looking sick. The friend suggested to Stan that he reconsider his workout regimen and suggested a healthier eating routine. Stan took the advice, but he went the extreme opposite and started consuming only junk food. Not long before the shooting, Stan's brother passed away, which seems to have deeply affected him, particularly because Stan is the one who found his brother's body. Stan's wife indicated that he wasn't on any sort of medication for anxiety or depression, but she thought her husband was suffering from paranoid behavior. She just didn't think it rose to the level of serious concern on her part. A neighbor seemed to corroborate the paranoia, claiming that Stan once told him that investigators followed him home from a bar, that unknown vehicles were parked around his house, and even asked the neighbor to peer through the scope of a hunting rifle to see if a car parked on their street was suspicious. Stan didn't exactly have a criminal history. In the 1990s, he was accused of pointing a gun at a Ford Bronco that pulled up next to him at a red light in downtown Milwaukee. The charges were later dropped without any further explanation, though it's believed that the accuser may not have been credible. In 1995, he was charged with misdemeanor battery after being accused of punching a woman in the mouth. Again, the charges were dismissed for an unknown reason. He had a few minor traffic tickets and was part of several civil lawsuits, including one in 2015 for compensation following a car accident. Attached to the lawsuit was a medical report that stated that Stan lost a daughter who was born prematurely in 2009. It went on to allege that he drank 3 beers per week, didn't use tobacco, and that he suffered from lower back pain and had since his 20s, though he didn't suffer from headaches or cognitive impairments. After the shooting, investigators thoroughly searched Stan and his wife's 3-bedroom, single-bath home located on West Potomac Avenue. The home was situated about 5 miles from the brewery, and records show that the couple lived there since 2004, purchasing the home on a VA loan. Crime scene tape was quickly used to create a border around the perimeter, and investigators removed numerous articles of evidence such as ammunition, as well as many other unidentified items. After the search was complete, the tape was stripped, and the side entrance to the home was boarded up. There were lots of little red flags. Small little red flags that, if stitched together, would create a large, waving banner. Though there were complaints, legitimate claims it seems, the shooting was not considered racially motivated, but was instead considered to be prompted by mental illness. No actual motive is known, or at least it's never been released. The shooter left no note, no manifesto, and no real insight into his frame of mind. The Molson Coors facility reopened on Monday, March 2nd, 2020, which was approximately a week after the shooting. Added security measures were instituted after the shooting, and 3 of the buildings were equipped with armed security officers guarding the lobby. Unarmed security was increased around the rest of the complex, and anyone entering any building was subject to a search of their bag or purse. Employee assistance program services, including counseling, were on site and available for employees. You see, we all have the unique ability to help prevent such a catastrophic event from happening, if we keep our eyes and ears open, and never hesitate to report when something, or someone, just doesn't seem right. With the delicate balance of mental health reform, education, active shooter training, and common sense gun laws, we may one day realize the dream that there will be no more active shootings. We pray that love will prevail over hate.
Too many have died! We should say to ourselves, not one more!
In the meantime, we urge our listeners to stay aware of your surroundings and keep in touch with your loved ones. If you see something, say something. You never know how many lives you'll be saving. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Active Shooter, the podcast. Remember, if you see something, say something. There's no telling how many lives you may be saving. A big thank you to Darren Curtis, who composed some of the songs on our show. You can find him online at www.darrencurtismusic.com. Make sure to check us out on social media. You can find us on Facebook at Active Shooter, the podcast, and on Twitter at Podcast Active. Thank you, and be safe.